So it's that time of the month again. And I know all of you know exactly what time of the month I'm talking about. That's right, it's time to restock on your exercise supplements. And so you're going to GNC, right? Walked into the door, dude behind the counter says, "Hey, what's up?" And there's never anyone in there for some reason. So you're walking down the aisles and grabbing your protein powder and your pre-workout, and you're walking past this section and it says nootropics. And you look at this shelf and there's tons of different options. So many different bottles that all say nootropics, and all of them have some variation of get smart quickly or improve your intelligence with just 3 weeks of trying this pill. And so you're thinking to yourself, that sounds a little bit like snake oil right there, right? Nothing is ever that easy. And so you ask yourself, is this too good to be true? And what actually is a nootropic? Well, let's talk about the science behind that.
Welcome to The Science Behind That with Atticus Hamilton.
Hello, all you scientists, and welcome on back to the Science Behind That podcast. I'm your host, Atticus Hamilton, and yes, I know I was gone for a while. Basically, it was Memorial Day after I was forced to wait because I ran out of time on my podcast hosting service. It was Memorial Day, my family came out, and then after that, I got very sick, and that lasted for like 2 weeks. I'm not even joking. You can probably hear it in my voice. I'm finally getting over it. It was just, it was a rough upper respiratory tract infection. Gave me antibiotics, so that helped. And I'm just now getting over it. So forgive me if my voice sounds, a little nasally, a little funky, but that's why. So, I'm gonna definitely try and hope that I'm able to get back into my regular schedule here now. Hopefully I don't have any recurrence of this illness. I don't think I will, but hopefully not. So anyway, as you heard from the intro, ladies and gentlemen, we're gonna be talking about nootropic drugs today. This is something that I've wanted to do for a while, and I recently watched Limitless again, and, that's such a good movie. I don't know if I'm like a fanboy for Bradley Cooper, I don't think so, but like he's a good actor, and that was a very good role for him, I think. Anyway, but, that just got me thinking. I'm like, man, I need to do, this episode. But before we jump into today's episode, I'd like to invite all of you to go grab yourselves a nice, steaming hot cup of coffee, add a little bit of maple syrup to it, and you know what? Just enjoy that. As I found out over these past 2 weeks, when you have a sore throat that feels like you got your tonsils cut out, coffee is really a beautiful invention. So, anyway, let's jump into today's episode, and, this is going to be a fun one, I think. So first off, what even is a nootropic, right? Well, a nootropic is a very broad and basic category that includes a variety of different drugs that may upregulate or enhance cognitive ability. And I say may because in reality, there's not that many FDA-approved drugs out there that are specifically designed for nootropic purposes. There's a couple drugs out there that were designed for the treatment of different conditions. One of them is called modafinil or modafinil, however you pronounce that. Modafinil, and that is a non-amphetamine central nervous system stimulant, and it was created primarily to treat adults with work-sleep disorders, so like narcolepsy, obstructive sleep apnea, that sort of stuff. But in addition to that, there is research coming out that shows that in people who don't have those conditions, so otherwise healthy people, it may actually possess some genuine nootropic effects, and the mechanisms by it are still not very understood, right? So the mechanism of action for the treatment of those conditions is rather straightforward. It acts on various transporters in the brain, and it basically downregulates certain hormones that, or certain neurotransmitters that induce sleep, and upregulates those that, like dopamine, that produce a feeling of wakefulness, I guess. And there's also euphoric effects, mainly because it has a glutamagenic effect that's caused by it, due to upregulating dopamine levels. Blah, blah, blah. It just acts on certain pathways to modulate the neurotransmitters that are present in the brain. But the mechanism of action for its alleged nootropic properties haven't been fully explored yet, because modafinil for those purposes is still under investigation. Nonetheless, you can still buy it, of course, on the black market. People will usually get a prescription of it for like a narcolepsy or a sleep-wake disorder or something like that, and then sell it as a nootropic. And it is effective in preliminary studies as, when taken as a nootropic in otherwise healthy people. But again, that is an exception, and it is not approved for use as a nootropic. And so considering that, then what is a nootropic? Well, there's a lot of supplement companies these days that have come out and said, they have a killer ingredient for things that are nootropics. And so, like I usually do, to see what popular culture thinks are nootropics, I went to Healthline. So the 14 best nootropics and smart drugs reviewed. Apparently the person who wrote this is a registered dietitian, which is unfortunate because the first one she put here is caffeine, and that is not a nootropic. It's a psychoactive substance, but it's not a nootropic. And so this is something I want to define, because this is going to come up, not just in this episode, but throughout your life. If you're actively looking for nootropics, people are going to tell you a couple of things. Number one, they'll say that caffeine is a nootropic. And number two is they'll say that Adderall is a nootropic. Both of that is not true. Adderall is not a nootropic, and caffeine is not a nootropic. And why is that? Because they're not changing the way you're learning. So a nootropic can work by 3 potential ways so far, according to the research we've done so far. Number one is it can increase blood flow to the brain, which thereby allows neurons to function more efficiently, more quickly, right? That's one possible way. Number two is they could stimulate specific cells within the brain. For example, glial cells, neuroglial cells. Some of you may be like, what is a glial cell? A glial cell is basically like a macrophage in your brain. It's a cell that goes around and eats up all the dead cellular material and the debris and the waste products from your neurons. And there's a lot of data to actually suggest that part of genius is actually having higher levels of neuroglial cells than the average population. Because again, they clean up after neurons. So it's kind of like, you could think of it as driving, right? So think of a city. So you have a city, and you have a bunch of cars driving on the road, right? Think of the road as the axons, right, in the brain, and the cars as the neurotransmitters. And so they're driving from one place to another. Now, the cleaner that road is, the faster those cars are going to be able to drive because they have less things to avoid. Maybe there aren't potholes. You know, I drove through Newark, New Jersey not too long ago, and, you know, the roads there are absolutely horrible, and I'll never drive there ever again, right? There's potholes everywhere. They're just horribly maintained, and so it's kind of like that, right? And so if you're increasing blood flow to the brain, or if you're upregulating the activity of neuroglial cells, which clean up after the neurons, it's basically like, increasing the funding for road maintenance in a big city. Your efficiency of traffic is going to increase, much in the same way that you would see with cognitive abilities if you increase neuroglial cell activity. So that's number 2. And then, of course, number 3 is they can activate certain neurotransmitters. So like we saw with modafinil, right, it downregulates certain neurotransmitters and upregulates other neurotransmitters like dopamine. Dopamine has a lot of different roles, and I think that's something that not a lot of people realize, but dopamine is really important. Parkinson's disease, for example, one of the big reasons why people with Parkinson's are shaking all the time is because dopamine is involved in controlling fluid muscular movement. So with Parkinson's patients, a lot of the times we see underactive dopamine production. So when they're trying to move, their brain isn't producing enough dopamine, and so their movements are really jittery. And that can also translate to dopamine production is irregular as well in patients with Parkinson's, causing that jitteriness that we typically see. And so ultimately, as of right now, those are the 3 ways that a nootropic drug could work. Again, either increases blood flow to the brain, right? So the neurons get more nutrients, increases neuroglial cell activity, or directly acts on some sort of neurotransmitter and or receptor to fulfill some sort of specific purpose with the neurons themselves. And caffeine and Adderall don't do that, right? All caffeine does is it blocks adenosine. So it will bind to an adenosine receptor and block it so adenosine does not bind and you feel tired. So that's not a nootropic activity, right? Because the brain's blood flow isn't increasing. In fact, caffeine is a vasoconstrictor, which is funny. And you don't have changes in neurotransmitter levels. You just have a reduction of sleepiness, right? So caffeine is just a stimulant, not a nootropic. Similar thing with Adderall. Adderall is just a stimulant in a way. It's not a nootropic. It's not increasing your learning abilities because it's not changing what neurotransmitters are released. It's not increasing neuroglial cell activity, and it is not increasing blood flow to the brain, and it's not a nootropic. Now, when you take Adderall, you may feel like, man, I can really focus now. But that's not a nootropic, right? A nootropic drug actually has literature behind it to show that memory and memory is increased, information retention is increased, and or the process of learning is shortened. That's typically what we think of with a nootropic, and neither Adderall has that nor caffeine does that. So, yeah, caffeine is not a nootropic. L-theanine is an amino acid, right? And so, according to Healthline, L-theanine is the second best nootropic drug. Again, it's not a drug, it's an amino acid. And there are studies that show that theanine can increase blood flow to the brain. But the primary reported effects of theanine is that it has a calming effect, which again is not a nootropic. And of course they go on to say creatine, I don't even know how, I guess because creatine is involved in protein synthesis, so they figure, well, your brain can make proteins. Anyway, so overall, ladies and gentlemen, the thing that I'm trying to say here is there are a lot of supplements online that say they have nootropic effects. You need to be really careful with this because they're not cheap. I'm looking at one on here right now, right? And a 30-count pill bottle is like $80, $90. Let's see. Oh, I'm sorry. $70 for a 1-month supply. For a 4-month supply, it's $207, right? So it's not cheap, and you need to be very careful with what you're actually buying. So, are there any supplements online other than actual drugs that have nootropic properties? Because ultimately, the thing is, there are no nootropic drugs that are approved by the FDA, and the reason for that is it's a very new area of psychopharmacology. Nootropic drugs the drugs themselves aren't new, because again, we're rediscovering drugs like modafinil that may have these properties, but the actual research demand behind it is relatively new. And so because of it, there are no actual drugs that were created to be a nootropic that you can get a prescription for from your physician. That doesn't exist. And so if you are looking for something with nootropic properties, you have to turn to these supplement companies. And so the question then becomes, is there anything in these supplements then that actually have literature behind them? Well, to find that out, I looked up the top 3 nootropic supplements, and number 1 is called the NooCube, number 2 is called MindLab Pro, and number 3 is called Qualia Mind. Can I just say, who comes up with these names? The NooCube. I mean, anyway. So, going to NooCube, and you look at their ingredients. So, what are their ingredients? Glutamax, Bacopa monniaria, a 12-to-1 ratio, and Hyperzia serrata. Now, or also called Hyperzine A. Now, some of you may be like, hey, Hyperzine A, I recognize that. Yes, that's because it is a very common ingredient in pre-workouts. And so the dosages, of course, in pre-workouts are lower because it's there to give you a quick stimulation so you can focus longer. But it's, again, at least for NooCube, all of these ingredients are herbal ingredients. And why is that important? I think that's important because there's an issue with this. And the issue is, while yes, there are a lot of plants out there that do contain legitimate drugs, and there's fungi out there that do the same thing, right? So, for example, lion's mane mushroom. There are compounds in lion's mane mushroom that are being investigated as potential nootropic drugs. Another example, Piptosporus birchulinum, or the birch polypore mushroom, contains like 5 different drugs that are being investigated as anti-cancer and anti-HIV. But the problem is, there's 2 problems. When you just take, for example, the birch polypore mushroom, grind it up into a powder, and put it in a tincture and say, all right, you can get cured of cancer now, you don't know what the concentration of that drug is per gram of birch polypore, right? Because it may vary. And so this is the thing. So we have a lot of drugs in this day and age that came from plants or fungi, but the they've been purified, right? So it's not just an extract from the plant. They've been purified. The concentrations are very specific. We replicate them in the lab a lot of times using genetically modified yeast cells to produce it that way. And so when you just grind up a plant and put it in a pill or a tincture and say, this is everything you need, you don't actually know the concentration of the active ingredient in there. And so you could say, sure, this is 20 milligrams of hyperzine serrata being 0.5% hyperzine A. But that's just the plant, right? So you have 20 milligrams of plant powder. But what is the actual quantity of any, nootropic ingredient itself, any nootropic drug that is in the plant? In plants, generally, these are called phytoactive compounds. And so some of you may be like, why would a plant even produce a produce a drug for humans? Well, a lot of times plants produce these phytoactive compounds to fulfill a purpose. Usually that purpose is like warding off insects or warding off predators. And this is one of the reasons why sialic acid, which is a very well-known antibiotic, particularly topical, comes from a variety of different mushrooms and fungi, because fungi like to be sterile. And so they produce these phytocompounds which kill bacteria in their surrounding environment, producing an environment of sterility. And a long time ago, we learned this, and we were able to extract the sialic acid from various species of mushrooms, particularly ergot fungus. And we were able to increase that concentration and sell it as topical antibiotics. And so this is why I'm always skeptical about these herbal supplements, particularly these herbal nootropics, is because, yes, there are plants out there and there are fungi out there that are being investigated for pertaining potential nootropic drugs. However, by just grinding up the plant or the mushroom and putting it in a capsule, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get an active dose of whatever that drug is. And it's not just NuCube that does this. MindLab Pro, it has the same ingredients. Bacopa monniaria, that does have a lot of literature behind it that suggests that it could be helpful in the treatment of, for example, Alzheimer's disease. There's a paper right here titled Cognitive Enhancement and Neuroprotective Effects of Bacopa monniaria in Alzheimer's Disease Model, published in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology. They tested the effectiveness of an alcoholic extract of Bacopa monniaria on cognitive function and neurodegeneration in an animal model of Alzheimer's, and they found it was very effective in reducing the number of neurons and cholinergic neurons from dying, right? So ultimately, they found that it reduced the effects of Alzheimer's in their animal model. Another paper I have pulled up somewhere. Oh, there. Well, I had it pulled up. But another paper I had pulled up tested that a similar alcoholic extract of Bacopa monniaria on 40 different adult men and put them through a variety of different cognitive tests, and found that there was an overall quicker retention of information and a faster recall of that information. But once again, that doesn't necessarily mean that if you grind it up and put it in a pill and charge $240 that you're going to see massive improvements overnight. These plants and substances do contain drugs. It looks as it appears by the literature, but I'm always skeptical until the drugs are identified, extracted, and purified in actual concentration to where we can say, yes, 50 milligrams is an effective dose, whereas 10 milligrams isn't an effective dose. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. It felt so good to get back to making these. I'm really glad I'm not deathly ill again. So yeah, it felt really good to get back to making these. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and I hope you learned something. I'm not necessarily bashing on homeopathy. Look, I'll be honest, when I'm sick, I drink reishi tea, and I drink birch polypore tea. Why? Because there is a lot of data to show that there are high concentrations of those drugs in there. And, in my mind with that sort of stuff, it's like, can't hurt anything. But when you're dealing with companies that are selling these pills as, being limitless pills, basically, for $300-$400 a pill, that's when I'm kind of like, maybe we should just wait until the actual research gets out there and maybe purifies some of these extracts into actual drugs for the purpose of cognitive enhancement. So, I got a great email today from one of you listeners out there, Alex. If you're listening to this, hi, I got your email. I love reading these emails from you guys. And if you ever have suggestions or comments for the show, always shoot me an email like Alex did at thesciencebt@gmail.com. And I'd love to read your emails and what you guys have to say. Alex just wanted to email me and see how my show is going, and if there's anything that he could do to be helpful or supportive. And Alex, thank you for reaching out, man. If you like it, just keep listening. And if you have any ideas for me or anything that you want me to cover, go ahead, man. Shoot me an email. I'd love to read it and maybe do an episode over your suggestions. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for listening to my episode today. Thank you for bearing with me through the past couple weeks as I've been dealing with this stupid illness. And I will see you on Friday. Have a fantastic week. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, stand up and question everything.